January might seem like a dead zone when it comes to gardening, but it's actually a really good time to be starting a bunch of different flower and vegetable seeds. I'm going to put timestamps below for you because I am mixing up flowers and vegetables in this video for you today, but I'm going to take you through a ton of different seeds. Some of them are actually not going to be started right now, but they're going to go into your fridge because they need something called cold stratification, and you don't want to miss out on doing this now. Then I'm going to take you through some flowers you can be starting now, some vegetables you can be starting now, and then some bonus seeds at the end of this video that are all about experimenting. I think that you should be starting them now. That is what I do, and so I want you to stick around to the end to experiment with me. And if you don't know me, my name is Bree from Urban Gardening Canada, and I garden in Ottawa Zone 5. So if you are in Zone 5 or warmer here in Canada or anywhere in the US, then now is a good time to be starting with me. If you're in a cooler zone, just push yourself back a few weeks from this video. These seeds are all things that you could be starting in January, and it doesn't mean you need to start them today while you're watching this, but any time in January really is good for you. Except for these seeds I'm going to take you through now that are cold stratified. I really recommend sticking those in the fridge now. They'll be fine if they stay in there. Many people store their seeds in a freezer for a rainy day, so now is a good time to be throwing them in. So let's start by me taking you through all of the cold stratifying seeds. So if you don't know what cold stratification is, what it is that certain seeds need to go through a cold period in order to germinate. And so this is to mimic a natural cycle. So if you throw out seeds into your garden in the fall time, they get frozen and cold over the winter, and then they germinate come spring. So this is very common in a lot of perennials that are perennialized due to seeds, such as a hollyhock, for example. Those can survive by dropping their seeds over the fall and in through the winter, and then they'll reseed readily come the springtime. So cold stratification, for the most part, really only applies to flowers. So if you don't grow flowers, you can skip right over to the vegetable section. But I highly recommend including flowers in your garden because it brings in pollinators, and those pollinators help pollinate your vegetables. Plus, growing flowers is just such a beautiful joy. So I really recommend throwing some flowers into your garden if you don't already. One thing that I do want to mention, along with the fact that cold stratification is mainly for flowers, is that there's actually a really long list of flowers that could use cold stratification. We're talking over 30 to 40 plants. And so of course my list isn't going to have all 30 of them on there, but I am going to give you a few of my favorites because I just love to grow them and I think they add a lot to the garden. So that is what this list is going to be today. And so the first seed that I want to talk to you about today is lupins. So lupins are from the pea family. They're these beautiful stalks of flowers, and they're really, really beautiful if you want to have some native flowers in your garden. And they are really beautiful in a cottage garden if you really like the look of cottage gardens. And so I never wanted to grow these in the past because I'm originally from Thunder Bay and they grew wild in my backyard, and so I thought they were weeds, and I was like, why would I ever want to grow a weed in my garden? That's just goofy. And I've come to appreciate them and find them beautiful. And so if you're going to choose to grow lupins, I highly recommend first finding out if they're native to your area. And if they're native, I recommend finding a wild lupin variety over an ornamental. There are the two different kinds. And so if they are native to your area, I really recommend choosing the wild lupin variety. And so you're going to want to stick these into your fridge. And so there's two different ways you can do it. You can either wrap the seeds in a wet paper towel, put them into a sandwich container and stick them in your fridge, or you can do what I do, which is take the entire seed packet and just stick it in the fridge until you're ready to use it. And you want to keep your lupins in the fridge for a minimum of 30 days, but they can stay up longer if you want to. Okay, so the ever most important seed right now is the milkweed seed. This one needs cold stratification, and it has become very popular because this is the host plant for monarch butterflies. And if you've seen the news recently, you know that monarch butterflies are now endangered. And so it's really important that we do what we can to help support them. If you live anywhere that is on the migration route of monarchs, then I really, really recommend that you plant milkweed. And so this does need to be cold stratified in your fridge. Milkweed seeds need a minimum of 30 days in the fridge. So of course, now is a good time to put them in so that way you can pull them out come February or March to be able to start sowing them. Next up is columbine. This is another brilliant perennial that you can have. It's nice and lower growing with these small dainty flowers that pretty well hang upside down, and I love them. And so again, these also need cold stratification. There are wild varieties and there are ornamental ones. So check if your area has wild native columbine in it, and then I recommend always choosing the wild variety if you can. And similar to lupins, this is going to need that moist stratification, and so you'll want to put it into a wet paper towel in a sandwich container into the back of your fridge, and you'll want to leave columbine in your fridge for a minimum of 6 weeks. However, I have grown columbine without cold stratifying it and it has germinated. And so if you do find that you've run out of time, you can try and sow some seeds without the cold stratification. However, you will get better germination rates if you do cold stratify it. All right, the next is one of my personal favorites, and that's Rudbeckia or Black-Eyed Susans. Again, this is a native flower to many parts of Canada. So if you can choose a wild variety, that's always the best choice. But what I love about them is that they bloom early in the season and they go straight into fall. They are a beautiful yellow color. They're great in cut flower arrangements and last a long time, and they readily self-seed. So once you grow a few in your garden, they're going to come back year after year. So this is a good one that if you wanted to do a seed swap with somebody, you can, and they're also really easy to save seed from come fall. So you really don't need a ton of seeds. But if you are gonna go this route, you're gonna wanna cold stratify them as well for a minimum of 30 days in your fridge. These are ones that you can put the entire seed packet in. It doesn't matter how you put them in there, they will be happy and they'll be able to germinate. All right, next up is echinacea or purple coneflower. Another favorite of mine because the pollinators absolutely love this one. Again, it's another perennial. All of these that I've given you so far are just amazing because they keep coming back, and so there's only work that you have to do this season and then they'll come back year after year, and echinacea is no different. These are a really great one too that are easy to save seed from come fall. So if you just grab a few seeds from a friend or do a seed swap, that's a really good way to do it. And you can just put these seeds in the fridge, either the seed packet or in the moist stratification, and they need a minimum of 4 weeks in the fridge. So plan accordingly for that. And sometimes they can be really slow to germinate, so you just want to plan ahead to make sure that if you want blooms this season, that you're putting them in the fridge now. All right, so next up on the list is lavender. You don't necessarily have to cold stratify it, but it does help with germination. And so again, you can stick the entire seed packet into your fridge, and now is a really good time to be growing your lavender from seed. So stick it in the fridge for 30 days and then bring it out, and you're gonna wanna start it in February. Because it's a woody plant, it's gonna be growing really slow, and if you want a nice size lavender to either harvest if you're choosing a culinary option or just you want to enjoy the scent of it, you're gonna wanna make sure that it's in the fridge now so that way you can grow it in February and get a nice size plant. All right, the last one is a little different than the rest, and that is eucalyptus. This is a common plant that people grow if they want to dry it for dried arrangements, hang it in their shower for that aromatherapy feel, or if you put it into cut fresh flower bouquets. And there are only some eucalyptus that need to go into the fridge, and that is the cold tolerant varieties, and they need 4 to 6 weeks in the fridge. And you really want to do this one now if you're growing it, because any type of woody plant like the eucalyptus is very slow to grow. And so it's going to take time to germinate, but it's really going to take a lot of time to grow into a decent sized plant. I grew them last year and did the cold stratification in January and planted them, and they only grew about 18 inches tall by the end of the season here in Ottawa. And so if you really want to be using them for any type of dried arrangements, you're going to want to start these now. Okay, so next we're going to move on to the seeds that you can actually be sowing into the soil right now, which is way more fun. But before we get into that, I just wanted to know, what are you growing this season and what are you the most excited to be growing? If you wanted to stop and leave that in the comments right now, I would love to hear from you. What are your garden plans? What are you the most excited for? And while you're at it, if you wanted to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, I would absolutely love it to know to keep making more videos like this. Okay, let's get into the flowers now that you can be sowing today. Okay, the first up is pansies. And you might be wondering why you would want to grow pansies since they're so cheap to buy from the greenhouse, but there's a couple of reasons. The first is that you can choose the exact variety that you want. You can choose the color, the size, whatever it is that you love about pansies. The second is you can grow as many as you want. And the third is they're just really fun to grow. And so pansies are one of those ones that you want it to be blooming at the time that it's ready to be planted outside. And since they are cool, loving annuals, you can plant them out nice and early to get that color before a lot of other people do. And so that's the benefit about growing your own. And so starting them in January means that they're going to be a really good size to be planted out come April or May, and they'll already have blooms on them. And also if they bloom early inside, it's actually not an issue. So you can be enjoying blooming pansies inside of your house before the spring even comes. And so now is a really good time to be planting them. Next up is foxgloves. These are similar to lupins in how they look with their tall spiked flower, but these are biennials. So what happens is they only flower on their second year. So if you want to get flowers in your first year, you're going to want to start them early, or at least have the plant in a really good size so that way next year they're guaranteed to bloom. And because they flower on their second year, you're gonna wanna grow these every single year so that way you'll always have that second year bloom coming in. And these are another really beautiful flower for any type of cottage garden or in the background of a border because they grow so tall. They're really, really beautiful flowers, so I highly recommend growing these. Okay, so this one is a bit of like a niche flower, but if you like to grow carnations, especially the tall cut flower style carnations, I recommend starting those ones now if you want to get blooms. And I am a sucker for carnations. I know they're really cheap at the grocery store as a bouquet, but you get to choose so many different colors and it's really fun to grow your own. And these are such an underrated flower because they last in a vase for over 2 weeks and they have such a beautiful scent. Plus they come in such a wide array of vibrant colors, and so I absolutely love them. And if you wanted to grow them yourself, I recommend starting them now, or at least buying the seeds so that way you can start them sometime in January. And they also are really cold tolerant, so you can plant them out nice and early in the springtime for them to keep growing. The only thing you want to be careful of is that mice really like these plants, and so you want to keep them covered and protected because there's not a lot of food out there for mice come early spring, and so that's the one downfall to them. But otherwise, if you wanted to grow beautiful cut carnations, now is a great time to be seeding them. All right, so this is back to one we talked about before, but that's eucalyptus. And this is specifically if you're not growing a cold tolerant type that doesn't need cold stratification. If your variety that you bought doesn't mention any type of cold stratification, then skip that part and start sowing them right now because again, like I said, they're a woody plant. They are very, very slow to grow, so you're gonna wanna get them in the soil now so that way you can get a larger plant come middle of summer. Okay, so this is the last flower on the list, and that's begonias. This is another one that you could be buying from the greenhouse, but again, you get such a wider set of variety for colors and leaf color if you choose to grow them yourself, and they are another slow growing annual. So I recommend that if you like begonias and you want the challenge of growing them yourself, to plant these seeds in January. Okay, so we are about to go to the vegetable seeds that you want to be planting in January, but before we get into that, I wanted to quickly mention that I have a course that's going live on February 1st, and it's all about strengthening your garden in the face of climate change and being a more resilient gardener. And I'm really excited to bring this to you, and winter and spring is the perfect time to be taking this course because it allows you to learn everything that you need to do now to set your garden up for success in the season. And the entire purpose is that whether you have droughts or high rainfall, high winds, that you're being able to set your garden up for success so that way you aren't limiting how much you get from your harvest, because if you lose anything from a drought or high winds, like that really just hurts your soul after all these months of working. And so the entire course is built so that way you can set it up right from the get-go to be really strong. while it's also teaching you about sustainability and why certain products on the market are actually so bad on the planet and really shouldn't be sold at all. And so if you're interested in this course, I'm going to drop a link in the description below so that way you can get some more information and sign up to my newsletter, because those on my newsletter are going to get a surprise. And so it's better to be on the newsletter if you're interested in this course. Okay, so let's get into the vegetables that you can be planting now. So the first up is onions and leeks. So that is what I have growing behind me right now, and I'm going to be making a video on how to grow onions from seed and everything you need to know for that. So stay tuned for that upcoming video. You're going to want to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that. And you want to start these now because they can take a very long time, and you really want to make sure that there's enough daylight hours for your onions to grow. If you're growing here in Canada, it's important to get long day onions because we have long days in the summer, and so you really want to capitalize on those long days and make sure that you get a harvest before the days start to shorten again. And same with leeks, they're just very slow growers. But the beauty about leeks is you plant them now and you can still be harvesting them into October or November because they're so cold hardy. And so it's a really great crop to add to your garden because it's just something else you could be harvesting when the garden is coming to a close. All right, next up is rosemary. And so this is really similar to eucalyptus. Rosemary is a woody herb, and so that means it grows really, really slow. And so you're gonna wanna sow your rosemary now so that way it gives it time to grow and be able to turn into a beautiful plant and be able to harvest it. Another herb is parsley, and so parsley is a good one to be starting now because it can take up to 3 weeks for the seeds to germinate, and they're notorious for being really difficult to grow from seed. And so the earlier you start them, the better chances that you have, and if they don't germinate or they're growing too slow, you have enough time to start a second round of seeds. All right, next on the list is celery. Celery, like parsley, is a very slow grower, and so you're gonna wanna get that going now so that way you can start harvesting earlier in the season. The fun thing about celery is that it's also quite cold tolerant, so you can be harvesting your celery in September or October. As long as you aren't getting a bunch of really hard frost, your celery is going to keep growing, but it is a slow grower and it can be finicky for germination, and it can be susceptible to different pests in your seed soil. So it's another one that you want to be starting earlier rather than later, so that way you have time if anything goes wrong to start it again. Okay, so next up is artichokes, and this one is a new one to me this year. It seems so different than everything else that I've grown in the past. And so artichokes actually need a cold period called vernalization, and this is why you need to start them now, is that they need a period of about 2 weeks of cold before they even start to flower. And an artichoke, of course, is an immature flower pod, and so to even get the artichoke, you need cold weather. And so you need to balance starting your seed, having the plant, cold stratifying the physical plant, and then planting it out to get the blooms. But you can't control the weather, which is what makes this one more complicated. And so if you start your seeds now, there's a chance you could capitalize on 2 weeks of cool spring weather that you can put the plants outside under cover, so that way they get those 2 weeks of vernalization before you plant them out in the garden. And so these are really large plants, so just make sure you plan accordingly if you are going to grow them. And so starting them now in January means that you have the opportunity for your plant to grow to a good size, to be able to go outside to get cold for 2 weeks before you plant it out in your garden. Next up is strawberries, and strawberries is similar to artichokes, that it needs 2 weeks of vernalization, or you could actually cold stratify your strawberry seeds, so it depends what you want to do. So you have two options. You can take the seeds into the moist paper towel in a sandwich container and put it in your fridge for 2 weeks. Or what you can do is you can plant your strawberry seeds in moist potting soil and then cover it and put that in the fridge for a couple weeks. So that way when you pull it out, it's already moist and your seeds will start to germinate. But strawberries grow very slowly, and if you do want berries in this season, you're gonna want to start them now in January. Okay, so the final plant before my bonus experiment plants is sweet potatoes. So sweet potatoes is a really good one to be planting in January or early February. I already have quite a few videos out on how to start your sweet potato slips, and so I'll put a link in the description below so you can check out those videos if you do want to grow sweet potatoes. And I also have a video when I harvested them. Last year was my first year ever growing them, and so you can check out how it went growing the slips and how it went harvesting them. If you're going to grow your potatoes in water, then you 100% have to start now, because growing them in water is way slower than growing them in soil. And if you're going to grow them in soil, you can probably start those at the end of January. But the good thing is that if your sweet potato vines ever root and grow way too large, you can actually cut the vine, reroot it, and start another plant. So it's really not a big deal if you start them too early in the season, and they really don't take up a lot of space on your growing rack here. So that's totally fine. But I really recommend grabbing a sweet potato and starting that in January. And again, you want to check out those videos so you know exactly what type of potato to grow and the different methods that you could do it. So again, check out the link below. Okay, so these are my final 3 seeds, and these are a bonus because not a lot of people are going to be saying in Canada to be starting these in January, and I always do, and I think that you should too. And that is broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage. And so the reason that I start these in January is because I plant these out up to 6 weeks before my last frost date. So if my last frost date was May 15th, I'm actually planting these out April 1st, assuming that I don't have 3 feet of snow on the ground, which has happened to me one year. But I grow them under cover, and so if you have a cold frame up or a hoop house built, it allows the soil to unfreeze and warm up so you can actually plant in it in April. And oftentimes April in zone 5 and warmer is actually workable soil. And so I start them now so that way when they do go outside, they're about this large, and so they're in a good healthy size. And the reason that I do that is because 9 times out of 10 in the eastern and southern Ontario area come June, we always get a 40-degree heat wave. Like, it almost never fails. And that's really hard on the broccoli and the cauliflower because it can make them bolt. And so the goal is to start your seeds early, get them out early so that way they have enough time to form heads before we get the really hot weather. And that way you can get a spring harvest. And then you can start them again if you're gonna grow them for a fall harvest as well, because cauliflower, broccoli, and cabbage are all super cold hardy. And so the benefit of that is that when you grow them under cover, they're totally fine. You don't really have to worry about them. They don't want to frost, but they will grow as long as the temperatures are in the positives. And so this is a really, really good one to be starting in January, so that way you can grow them and plant them in April. And this is really only for anyone who is really interested in experimenting in the garden, who loves brassicas like broccoli and cauliflower like I do, and has the ability to grow under cover. And if this is you, then I really, really recommend planting these seeds in January. Okay, and we're finally at the end of this really long list of plants that you can be sowing in January, which is really cool because so many of us have already taken our winter rest and we're ready to get going again. And I am going to be making a similar video to this in February, and you're going to see a lot of the repeat seeds because it'll be time for me to remind you to pull out those seeds out of the fridge in February to plant them. And then there's a few other ones to be planting in February as well that are new. And I will remind you about all of these January seeds again in case you didn't have the time to buy seeds yet or forgot to plant some of these. I'll make sure to remind you about it. But otherwise, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.